I'm Yvette Mathews. I am the Asset CMDB and SAM Practice Lead Architect inside of ITS Partners for our ServiceNow practice. I spend the majority of my time working on Asset, CMDB, and Software Asset Management. Our agenda today is we are going to talk about the CMDB, and then I'm going to go through some tips and tricks that I found to help make a more robust and sustainable configuration management database. So let's talk a little bit about what a CMDB is. I've heard from different customers in different places, they have different ideas about what a CMDB is. So ultimately, the CMDB is a database that contains all relevant information about the components of the information systems used in an organization's IT services and those relationships between those components. The components are what we call CIs or configuration items. ServiceNow also houses a separate table, but it's very closely related, which is our asset management section. So we hold our assets there as well. Things we would use our CMDB for are not just for incident, problem, and change, but I may use that for understanding our business service impacts. Business services are also configuration items, and I may use it to respond to incidents and problems. Things that we may typically use our CMDB for as well could be for understanding trending on equipment failures, being able to cost out specific aspects of our business. We have a lot of opportunity with a really good CMDB to do some interesting things inside our organization to save costs and to help build value. So why do we want a good CMDB? So what are our benefits to having a good CMDB? Providing those relationships. So when we talk about business service mapping is going to take your CIs and create logical relationships between those physical items as well as the services that run on them. So the applications, the software. Overall, I want to try to drive a costing benefit from that business service relationship. I can provide accurate data with a good CMDB. I'm able to drive our business critical processes. I'm able to determine who has what, where, when, and what's broken and be able to do it quickly and efficiently. I'm able to respond better to security incidents that are happening. And I can provide accurate information on impacts to services. So change management, something that's really important in most organizations. I want to make sure that I'm able to actually know what the impact is going to be if I take down a server or switch or make changes to configurations, what's going to happen and who are those people that are impacted. This takes those change management meetings from people guessing or assuming that they're not impacting anyone else in the organization by taking a server down to actually being able to show whether or not I've taken another group down by making changes to a server. Why is it critical? Stale data is one of the banes of the existence of someone trying to work with the CMDB. The biggest complaint I hear from my clients is that our data is bad, our CMDB is bad. Well, a lot of the times, yeah, it may have stale data in it. That could be true. But in some cases, it's because we don't have good data sources populating the CMDB. And we'll talk a little bit more on another slide about what we should do to try to have better data sources. We want to automate relationship management of our infrastructure and services. It's really difficult to manually try to create business services inside the CMDB. You can do it, it's just going to take a lot of effort, and then it's only as good as that day that you put it together. Another piece of reason why the CMDB is critical is based on how ServiceNow is configured. Assets may or may not be created depending on how you're using ServiceNow. At the same time, if you have an asset management team, what you're doing in the CMDB is impacting them, and what they're doing in the asset management space is going to impact the data inside of the CMDB. So quality is the foundation. So at any time you're doing anything inside of ServiceNow that impacts the CMDB, you need to look at how am I impacting service management, hardware and software asset management, discovery and service mapping, security incident response, and vulnerability response. What am I doing that's going to impact those things? How could I make this better? So tips and tricks, which is why you're here, not just to hear about the CMDB. You're probably already using them. Tip number one, and this is a pretty basic tip. We need to prioritize what we're trying to put in scope in the CMDB. A lot of efforts fail around the CMDB because we try to put too much in the CMDB at the same time. Step number one should be to assess your current environment. What should be in scope for that CMDB? What are the initiatives that have been prioritized by your executive leadership team? What are they trying to accomplish? Identify the functions that can benefit from the CMDB. Understanding who could use the CMDB may help you build a more robust product that can be used by more people. You also may get more assistance in ensuring that the CMDB data is good. You want to identify what problems you're trying to solve with your CMDB. What are we trying to do? If you've got an initial project around the CMDB, what's your project goal? And then overall, can you get your stakeholders support on this? If you can't obtain stakeholder support on the CMDB, it's going to be a much more difficult journey to get that CMDB into a working state. Tip number two is something we don't always think about, and that's process, process, process. And I repeat that because it should be a mantra when you're working in your CMDB. A lot of people assume that when we have automated sources populating our CMDB, it should automatically be good. Well, I would like that to be true, but it's not. Instead, what we need to actually work on with our CMDB is ensuring that we have processes in place to ensure that we're validating that data on a periodic basis, whether it's manual or programmatically entered. For manual data, you want to try to avoid keeping manual data in your CMDB. Let me tell you a little bit about why. A lot of times when we start creating a CMDB, we see a need for a particular piece of data at that time to be put in, and I may not have a data source for it. The problem with entering manual data is the person who agreed to put that manual data in may not be in that job forever. Their replacement may not either know they need to do that or may have decided it's less important. Therefore, that data will become stale and any reporting around that is not going to be any good. So putting our processes in place to ensure that our data stays up to date is pretty critical. Setting up automated reporting, finding the key pieces of data that you're looking for that could potentially be missing, serial numbers, MAC addresses, models and manufacturers, things that are coming from your automated source of record. You're going to want to ensure that those particular items are run on a periodic basis in a report so that you can see where you start to have failings and correct them before they become supremely problematic to the process. So tip 3, data sources. Yep, we want to ensure all our data sources complete. Step number 1. Step number 2, clean up your bad data before you put it in the CMDB. But here's something that you may or may not have thought about. When we're identifying data that needs to go in the CMDB and you're doing one of these exercises, the first thing that we want to make clear is identify the data that you need, not the data that you want. Those are two totally different things. Data we need is critical, data we want is optional. Just because you can collect the data doesn't mean that you should. So we really need to vet out why we want that data. Where is it coming from? Is it repeatable? Is it obtainable easily? And additionally, who's going to own that data? We'll talk about that as well in just a second. I need to identify where I get the data and those systems of record, and are those data sources clean? Are they going to stay clean? Do they have a team maintaining them? So if I'm bringing in discovery data from ServiceNow's tool, is the team staffed to utilize the tool properly? Is it configured correctly? And are they going to maintain it or make changes based on my needs for data in the CMDB? Same with SCCM. If I'm choosing to use SCCM, is the integration configured properly? Is the SCCM instance configured properly? Am I bringing back the right data? If you're using any other tool such as Altiris, BigFix, SolarWinds, etc., those same criteria apply. Is the data good? How's the data coming in? Do we have someone who's managing that data source? And can we set up open lines of communication in case we see problems inside of ServiceNow? The biggest complaint I hear when I go to clients about their data, when we're talking about data sources, is the data is bad in ServiceNow, and it's ServiceNow's fault. ServiceNow is just the repository for the data. The data is probably bad at the data source, and that's usually what we find when we go and check. We want to identify how we're going to get that data. As I mentioned before, manual data leaves something to be desired because I don't have to keep manual data up to date. It would be nice if we're going to put it in there, but if I don't have any automated way to do that, I can't guarantee that that's going to happen. So instead, I want to make sure that when we're talking about automated data feeds, that those are done on a periodic basis, and that's up to you to decide how often you do them based on network traffic, changes in those raw data feeds, etc. I want to identify how to validate my data so that we can get trustworthy data. Trustworthy data is the key to any good CMDB. How do we identify what we need to validate the data? Doing a data validation exercise and sitting down as a group and looking at all of the data inside the CMDB by class, determining what characteristics are required for it to be considered complete, creating reports that let you determine if that completed data is not there. We also want to ensure how we understand how it's updated on an ongoing basis. Is it weekly? Is it monthly? Do we do this every day? Is it only doing data deltas? All of those things need to be decided when we're in the planning phases of setting up a CMDB. If you already have a CMDB, it's a good idea to look through that information and see what you can find on how it's currently configured and how often it should be. The Center of Excellence is an interesting animal. So my tip number 4 is to set up a Center of Excellence. They're going to help you manage things that need to be managed in the CMDB, the people, the process, and the tools. You should have a staff or people assigned to manage part of the CMDB, meaning there should be a dedicated group of people who do your reporting, such as CMDB analysts or a CMDB manager. That doesn't have to be a full-time role, but someone needs to be accountable for the CMDB and the health of the CMDB. The Center of Excellence can help define what those roles and responsibilities are. They can help you put together your processes. They can help define the policies around the CMDB. They should be made up of a group of leaders in different parts of the organization, all those stakeholders we talked about at the beginning. You need executive sponsorship to get a good Center of Excellence going. They will help you define how the tool is used, the process is in place, and if needed, may be able to help you define what types of roles or people need to be put in place to help keep the CMDB up to date. One of the biggest things that I found with the Center of Excellence is they're the first group when they're looking at the data that have spotted when the CMDB is out of sync with the asset repository, and we start seeing either duplicates or problems with statuses and states inside of the CMDB. Tip number 5 is to assign owners to our CMDB data. Without owners, no one is accountable to keep data up to date, meaning I don't have to do it. It's not my job. If it's not my job, then I don't care. And that means the CMDB is going to go downhill fairly quickly. We need documentation on who owns what. Same with the processes, as we mentioned before. If it's not documented, it's not a fact. It's a suggestion, and I don't have to do anything that's a suggestion. Documentation provides a list of things to be measured against. It's no longer optional to do something, it's a requirement. So when we talk about the CMDB itself, we need to talk a little bit about impacts that other places inside of ServiceNow are going to have on the CMDB. For example, we talked a little bit about asset management, and asset management has a direct impact on the CMDB based on how it's configured inside of ServiceNow. If I make changes to an asset which hasn't affected CI, those changes will also be reflected on the CI. Same thing for the CMDB. If I make a change to the CI, it will also make a change on the affected asset. And that's going to be based on your model categories, et cetera, that you have configured and how you're bringing your data in. But it's something to keep in mind is that for your CMDB, do you really want the first time that you see an item in the CMDB to be when it's discovered? Or would you prefer to know that something's been purchased? And when it's purchased, it's technically an asset. It's not really a CI yet because it's not in place and it's not running. I think what I found to be the most successful way to keep the CMDB up to date is to understand when things are purchased and it's stayed as an asset, capturing that asset information, and then once it's put into production and it becomes a fully fledged CI with all of the characteristics, I already knew it was there. It's less of a surprise to me to see that something's coming up. That's just something for you guys to think about when you're working on your CMDB, is ensuring that you've got the right information coming in. Utilizing procurement, utilizing your purchasing process for your assets will help ensure that we know what CIs are supposed to be there. A story I like to tell my customers, which may resonate with some of you, is that if I don't understand what has been purchased, that will eventually be in my CMDB. So I don't understand that there are 500 laptops, which will eventually be 500 laptop CIs coming. How do I ensure that I know that what's here is actually what was ordered? Yeah, that's an asset problem, but from a CMDB problem, I need to know that they were supposed to be here. I need to know that what my warranty information is what I'm actually receiving, because it's based on the serial numbers of those assets when they were purchased. So those are just some ways that we can optimize our CMDB by helping utilize other sources like our asset management tool. Understanding that our tools such as network scanning devices, security software, etc., all of those things can also help enhance the CMDB. Make sure that whoever is providing that information owns that information so that they are held accountable to those pieces of information as well. So those are some of my tips and tricks that I found have been very helpful around the CMDB. Happy to answer any questions that you may come up with around the CMDB. Thank you for coming. It's been a joy talking about CMDB. You've got my email address, and I look forward to hearing from some of you some of your questions. Thank you very much.